Hello and welcome back to the Monte and Wolf Show. We are here to discuss some epic LCK gameplay. But first, before we do that, Wolf, we're going to talk about the great tragedy. It's not really tragic. The divine retribution against KT Rolster for letting Keen and Cuz go. They have been punished as God intended for their horrible mistakes in creating this roster. They thought to themselves, but what if we just created DRX again? Forgetting that DRX was actually a terrible team up until their Worlds run, forgetting that Pioshik was benched in favor of Juhan as they approached the World Championship. And of course, Wolf, not even getting the key component to that roster, which was Zeka. And so we got to see the DRX Civil War this week. It was the conclusion of the LCK week, KT versus Hanwha Life, where KT looked completely lifeless and rolled over and died promptly in a horrible best of three that Hanwha Life completely stomped them in.
I mean, they didn't even look like they belonged in the LCK. Like, remember to contextualize the loss as well. So if you're thinking about Hanwha Life like they're from last season, like if it's Hanwha Life from spring, who was a top 3 team that could have contested to go to the finals, this is not that Hanwha Life. Like, this Hanwha Life has been okay. They've been kind of middling. They had some really rough games. That loss to D plus Kia especially comes to mind, where they got absolutely dominated. Viper isn't performing as well as he did last season. So, I mean, Doran also has had some really, really bad games. And so going into this one, I was like, okay, well, KT will definitely lose because of what we've seen from them so far. But I knew it was going to be a 2-0, but I was like, there might be some like signs of life. But Hanwha Life will be the better team in the end, right? They'll win some, elder game where it goes to 35 and KT there was some hope, but then they messed it up. No, it wasn't. There wasn't even a single game. There wasn't any gameplay. There wasn't anything that happened. It was an absolute stomp in every lane. Hanwha was winning on every lane. They're making plays all over the map, and KT didn't even show up. It's like this team has, we talked about the DRX members and all that stuff. When they had Cuz and Keen, who were arguably, because they weren't defending world champions, less famous, less popular at the time. In the West, Keen obviously has a huge reputation in Korea. He's kind of like, the top laner, the gatekeeper, but he's not like as famous as Deft, right? And then that roster was quite good. Now they just have star players who are former stars, but not actually current stars, it feels like. And then Perfect, who's the best player on the team, but he also ran it down pretty hard in that second game in the Hanwha Life series on Renekton. So I don't know what to say except call up the challengers team, all 5 of them. And I always make fun of Chronicler when he's like, actually, I think we should call up Hambuk here or whatever, because, you slot one of these challengers players and it doesn't have a lot of experience. Usually it doesn't go well for them, and usually they get demoted back down because it just takes time to build synergy. But the KT team in challengers not only is the best team in challengers, but has played together for quite some time, not just this season or last season, but actually have stayed together for multiple splits. And they are way better than what I saw from KT yesterday. So, Hira, you pulled up the challengers team to ruin, potentially Perfect getting Rookie of the Year, when it was actually playoffs implications for Sandbox, and you messed with the competitive integrity there. And now maybe it's time to actually call up the full challengers team for real in the real emergency situation, because this is not looking good, Monty.
No, it's not. And the biggest surprise to me, Wolf, is that BDD is looking terrible. And part of this is definitely the meta. Like, BDD is just not the guy you want in an AD mid meta, right? We've talked about this before, but like BDD, even though he has had a couple good Jace games, like literally hadn't played Jace ever up until like a year ago. And that was his first, which is crazy considering this guy has been playing for like 8 years now. He did his only win this season is on Jace. He's played Yone 3 times, which definitely doesn't seem like a BDD champ, and has lost all of the games. He's played Corki a couple of times. Like, now we've got him showing up and losing pretty horribly to Zeka. Meanwhile, it does feel like a Zeka meta. But this is not, BDD is not that guy. Like, his entire career has been Azir. I mean, his top 3 champs, top 5 champs are Azir, Talia, Zoe, Oriana, and Syndra. then it's Rise, then it's Galio, then it's Akali. Like, we have to go way down the list. Corki is like his, what, 12th or something most played champion at 17 games, and he has a 35% win rate. This guy, like, hasn't been very good on the kind of champions that are in this meta. So I think that's part of BDD's performance, but it's just that KT look like they don't give a fuck. And, like, who wants to see Deft on Draven?
Yeah,
Isn't a Deft champ? Like, and I know they banned 580 carries that game to make Deft super uncomfortable, but this team has no agency. They don't look like they want to play together or be there. The coaching staff looks horrendous in terms of their drafts a lot of the time. There's really nothing going for KT right now.
in that Draven game, they, you know, if we're gonna talk about a specific draft, like they got, you know, pushed out of a lot of 80 carries, so they opted into it. But that was the game where they banned Talia and then opted into Corki versus Tristana to not have mid prio, to try to set up dives with Zyra in the bottom lane with a Draven when they couldn't actually get mid to be under their control at all. They still were able to make one successful dive happen. Successful air quotes, but they were able to set up a dive, right? Which in a lot of the games we've seen where teams are trying to play some dive, it doesn't work out at all. And I believe in that game they were also playing into Skarner as well, where you're going hard on trying to set up these big explosive combos and get a reset for Draven, and you're walking into Skarner, so you're putting yourself at risk of just getting impaled instantly every time you go in. And those types of drafts are we're seeing from like B&K FearX. We're seeing those types of drafts from DRX, right? Bro, where you're like, this is a draft that if you just completely like avert your eyes from what the enemy team has, it's like, oh, it's a pretty solid draft. But unfortunately, the enemy team exists with 5 champions who are good into your champion. So KT, like I mentioned it last week, definitely a bottom 4 team. We know that. Like we know they're in the bottom 4. But right now I'm like, will they be top 8 is the next question, because like you said, this team doesn't look thrilled to play together. It makes you wonder if there's internal issues going on, which is crazy to me considering how close Pioshik and Deft are. Like they're probably, in my opinion, just based on seeing camaraderie around the studio, the 2 players I feel like who have the most like brotherhood vibe going on. They're always hanging out with each other. They've always been together even when they're on different teams. Barrel as well, pretty known to have kind of like put his differences aside with Deft. But I watched the gameplay. There's no synergy. There's no coordination. The game where I watched, like, I felt like KT was slipping on banana peels on this either Herald or Baron fight where Perfect goes in 1v5 without anybody and like presses Q and he's like, I got healing, so maybe it'll work. And then he dies. And then they retreat, and then Deft goes in and like flashes to ult 5 people, and then gets hit by an Ash arrow and dies. And it reminds me of 2022 Nongshim, this roster that had Kana,
Yeah.
Red,
The Teddy.
BDD. It was actually, I think it was Ghost, right? Ghost
Oh, yeah, Ghost. That's
and
right.
Effort. And this 2022 Nongshim roster, you were like, oh, it looks okay on paper. It's not going to win the tournament, but you know, it's got some good players on it. They'll figure it out. And it was just by the end of the year, like Ghost was crying in post game interviews, and it was, and like the team had clearly just lost it in the sauce, and was BD was complaining about he had like long COVID and wasn't able to, his brain wasn't able to function properly. He was saying in interviews, but the team looked way worse than the sum of their parts to an incredible degree with the star power that was on that team. And I look at this team right now, and it feels like the same thing is happening. And even though the strength of schedule has been tough for KT,
Yes.
uh, like the momentum is so against them, and the way they're losing these games, I feel like makes me believe there's a chance their next opponent is Bro, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
That they could like lose a game to Bro, and or potentially if they lose game 1 to Bro, like drop the whole series because they just don't even look like an LCK team right now.
I do find that unlikely. And yes, I do want to point out that the strength of schedule, like their opponents have been Kwangdong, who's been surprisingly strong, but we'll get to them. D plus, Gen.G and Hanwha Life. And so they haven't played DRX, Nongshim, FearX, or Brion yet. So these are all teams that we would expect them to beat, and they're very heavily backloaded into those teams. So there is kind of light at the end of the tunnel. They play Brion and T1 next week. But after that, you know, their next couple of weeks are like Nongshim, FearX, and then DRX, right? And then FearX again. So they could have a strong week 4 and week 5. But I don't think so. Like, they need a confidence boost, it feels like. It feels like this team just doesn't want to play League of Legends right now. That's what it feels like. Like, you watch them play, and it's hard to see that motivation because, as you're pointing out, Wolf, the mistakes are just so fundamental, and they don't seem like they're even focused on playing the game. I think your comparison to the Nongchim roster is apt.
Yeah, it's just really strange and bizarre decisions that you see. Um, and if you compare it to last season, where this roster seemed like, yeah, obviously it's a downgrade from the 2023 roster, but the roster definitely had some camaraderie. And like when you'd see the comms, Barrel is yelling, he's hyped, he's making jokes, Pioshik is being funny, and you could see those moments because, oftentimes when we get a highlight moment from a player in the LCK. They show the first person view and then the comms of the player in that moment yelling at his teammates. And you would just always see something really, really fun in those moments and something that feels almost family like in KT. And they're not showing any comms now because they're not making any highlight plays. There's no positive plays. There's no good replays yet. But at the same time, it just from seeing them on stage and seeing the player cameras, it's a totally different vibe. I don't know what's going on, but we're 2 weeks in, and I don't have a lot of hope right now. I hope something changes.
Well, this meta, you just have to say, like, if we talk about Pioshik and like some of his best games on Kindred or Lee Sin, it's also not the meta for him being an AP jungler. So it feels like AD mid AP jungle is it's great for a team like Gen.G, great for a team like Hanwha Life potentially, although Peanut maybe not, although he did play the fiddlesticks. uh, not sure how real that was.
He played KT with it, so it's not real.
It's not real. Was funny though.
Deft slid into his ultimate. Okay, it wasn't
He
Peanut's
did.
good play. Deft just went into the ultimate. He just was like, "I'm going in."
Def did Zeri slide into Fiddlesticks Ultimate. This is true. So yeah, I mean, look, I think at least Hanwha looks like they're better in this meta, but that's the thing about this is a very specific meta, and teams around the world are going to look much worse or much better as a result. That's why everybody's hyped about Gen.G, and I think reasonably so right now. But also part of this is you have to admit that this is a fucking insane meta for Gen.G. Returning Zeri plus Chovy on AD mids, plus Canyon on Karthus in Italy, and now Zyra is extraordinary for this Gen.G roster, who is already a very good team. Now we anticipate that prior to summer playoffs, prior to Worlds, Riot's going to shift this meta because it is way too much Tristana and Corki right now. So that's all going to get tamped down. So there are going to be a lot of changes, but for the moment, looking strong. And I think KT does need a meta shift if they're going to be able to get back into this in any kind of reasonable way. I mean, maybe we get some pop-off Deft Ezreal games, obviously one of his classic champions that he plays. But it feels rough for KT at the moment, and I'm not sure there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel unless patches hit.
Yeah, I really think that Riot probably has some plan in the next few patches, even if it's before Worlds, to make AP mid laners more relevant again, because the changes to AD carry items and IE and stuff have really just made it so that you want two AD carries in every game, and then we have two incredibly strong tank champions who are pretty broken, Cassante and Skarner, that provide a front line for that, and then you have the supports having Warmogs, so there's a lot more flexibility in how you can set up and engage and set up for double AD carry. So the whole meta has just like exploded into this double AD carry with mid jungle. AP jungle. And so the different AP champions we're seeing in jungle are not going to suit certain junglers. Like Pioshik's best was Lilia, I would say, in the past.
Sure.
Pretty
Yeah.
rare, but Lilia is pretty tough to pull off because she just gets blown up by Tristana in 2 seconds, and even if you get the sleep off, the team fight's over. But yeah, I think Tristana is extremely broken right now. She has an
Yes.
escape. She's like the best split pushing champion in this meta. She 1v1s a lot of the other AD
She
carries
auto
in
pushes
general.
mid, so you have mid prio.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Tough to gank. She could solo objectives. Like she's like, oh well, there's something going on top lane. I guess I'll just kill the dragon real quick and then teleport over there. And it's actually just ridiculous what she could do right now. So Riot's probably gonna to hit the nerf bat on that one, and we'll probably see some meta changes. But KT better hope for it. I guess that's my final thoughts on this. I don't think they're gonna call up their challengers team because that would be too extreme. And even though here I did it once as kind of a joke, um, I don't think that they're gonna do it again. What I don't want is for them to be like, yeah, well, Pioshik's having a rough time. We'll bring Hambak in only, who doesn't know anybody on this team, hasn't practiced with anybody. Hambak is the jungle player for KT. And he's very good, by the way. Like, I think second to Lucid in terms of all the junglers for last year. But they also have Wei and Hype in the bottom lane. Hype is the AD carry, Wei is the support. Wei is very good, very smart. He's like a more refined version of Beryl. I think Beryl might have higher highs than him, but we're not seeing him right now. So, and you guys have already seen casting the top lane player, and Zini is the mid laner. So, Zini is, I think, pretty big downgrade to BDD overall, but maybe not in this meta. But if you bring all of these players in together, then you actually have a real team that is probably motivated like they were last time, albeit a slightly different roster when they were subbed in. Maybe you can keep Perfect as well, who's also played with these players. But if you just bring one up, then I feel like you're just gonna make the players mad. Like Pioshik's gonna be like, you called up Hype, I want to play with Deft. Oh, you called up Hambak, Deft's gonna be like, I want to play with Pioshik, he's my friend, Or maybe they're not friends anymore. Maybe now they're enemies, Monty. I don't know, but I don't want to see like piecemeal KT trying some of
The
that. 'Cause that would be
fellowship of
best
DRX has been broken.
way.
But it is nice on the other side of former DRX players. It is nice to see Zeka doing a lot better. I mean, obviously, like he's a great Yone player, always has been. The Trist like suits him very nicely as well. So this is a team, at least with Hanwha Life, that was shaky for the first week of competition, but I think they looked a lot better this week.
Yeah, no doubt. I think Hanwha is, as long as they can get Doran under control, I think they will end up being definitely a top 4 team. And it's really interesting to see how this season has shaken out in terms of where our number 3, number 4, number 5 teams are, because T1, yeah, a bit shaky at the beginning, but we'll talk about them a little bit more later. They also bounced back in a pretty big way this week, I would say. But you lost KT, but you have Kwangdong. So, T1 probably second place. You've got Kwangdong D plus in there, and Hanwha Life. And those 3 spots are pretty contentious, I would say, right now. D plus going back to a little bit more fraudulent territory this week, but still looking like they have some pretty high highs right now. And I think aiming when he's not just running it down is, arguably the second best AD carry in the LCK. Like Viper's not having a good season after Pays. Pays is the best AD carry right now.
Oh no.
No, you have to admit it now. Now, Monty, it's true. It's actually true this time. Like right now, he's the best. It's only 2 weeks in, but
Viper
right now
was
he's
a
the
lot
best.
better this week. But yeah, Pays has had a very strong start to the season. I agree. Those Ezreal games alone versus T1 were very, very good.
So I'm really looking forward to see how those battles, kind of go on in terms of those big teams against each other. I guess it is possible T1 could slip down, but while we're like giving the funeral for KT, like Kwangdong has risen to replace them. So
Hell yeah, let's talk about it.
yeah,
I love Kwangdong. Actually, here's my problem with Kwangdong Wolf. Until the third and final game against T1, Bulldog had only played Corki and Tristana. And basically, we'd seen a lot of Maokai from Cuz, so they were more or less one note, Wolf. And so what T1 did was they banned Tristana, and then Kwangdong first pick Rumble, and then Faker took the Corki away on red side. And then we got to see Bulldog's Yone. And Bulldog is a player that I just never want to see play Yone because, first off, he always has had a bad laning phase. And then he's like, should I play a hard losing matchup in the mid lane with Yone and DeKorki? I wonder how this will go for Kwangdong. And Cuz is like, but what if I played Vi instead of Maokai? And it's like, okay, Kwangdong, none of the things that were winning you games so far this year, which is like Dudu on Cassante or Skarner, Cuz playing Maokai, Bulldog playing literally only Corki or Tristana. were true. Where they got the versatility in their composition was, weirdly enough, using this rookie player, Leaper, in the bot lane, and Andil. Like, their bot lane was actually doing a bunch of different stuff, including going back to the old CV Max staple,
It's Talia
Talia.
bottom lane.
Which, by the way, I have to give you props for. The fact that you called that out when you weren't, that was a period of time when Griffin was playing. You weren't even casting League of Legends, and you knew that is very impressive research. That I was like, holy shit.
I've watched a lot of League of Legends from the old times. I will occasionally like grab a glass of whiskey and pull up and look at like I'll just go to Leaguepedia and pick a VOD that I can find from a random group stage and just watch it and be like, what was it like back then? I didn't watch this game. I only watched the finals, or I heard tales about which teams were strong, but the Griffin Talia Pantheon one was so iconic. It was a very different meta and a very different reason that lane was very like all in and as a kill lane where you set up the flip with a Pantheon stun. This is more of a okay. It seemed really exciting because like, oh, you put the rocks down and then the Callista
Yeah.
can't move, except that it was lethality Callista and she just poked and didn't really care about martial pose. So I actually kind of felt very silly about this because I was like, oh, this is kind of hype. It's so good into Callista. And then
Well,
when we watched the
it
game, I was like,
also
no,
like
never mind.
they also, the problem with the Callista Nico lane in particular is if you pick Talia Nautilus, you can't do anything at level 1, right? So they got hugely denied, shoved under their tower. And to be fair to T1, and we will talk about this also, Guma did a very good job of avoiding the E, or they picked off Leaper. Like, they got into the back line and picked him off very early in the fight. So Gumayushi could actually do a lot, but I think it was mostly because of the way T1 and Kwangdong were playing. But this is a classic Kwangdong CV Max thing too, not just the Talia, but like win game 1 and then do some weird ass shit in game 2, lose it, and then like pin all your hopes on game 3 of this series and then just end up not winning. So I will say, like, for me, Kwangdong has been very one note in terms of their compositions, which concerns me, right? Especially as the meta shifts. And it's like, okay, well, they found some stuff that worked in the first couple of weeks, but when they were put outside of that comfort zone, especially in that game 3, they looked way worse.
Yeah, and I think when you're CV Max in these situations and you win game 1, it's super hype. You're embracing your players, and it was so exciting for us casting it as well. Like we were acting like Kwangdong won the series when they won game 1 because they beat T1. CV Max is celebrating. Players look really emotional, and then you get kind of into your like prideful CV Max moment where you're like, and now I'll beat them with Talia bottom lane. And then you put a lot of pressure on your players, right? Like Leaper is known to play some pretty eclectic picks in solo queue when he was streaming. And he has a very aggressive play style. So it's not unbelievable that he would have played a lot of Talia bottom lane and would be like well versed in this kind of unique pick because that's what streamers do. And then you put this pressure on him. You have this kind of felt like to me like half-ass draft a little bit with this, where it had some pieces that worked together, but it was just overall not enough damage output in the double 80 carry meta. You just need more. And Talia has a combo, and then her auto attacks don't hurt people. Her Q, can add consistent damage over a longer fight if all the conditions are correct for that to happen. But ultimately, when you lose that game, you already put your players under such immense pressure to play this weird, unique comp, and then kind of like, basically style on T1 with this because it's so unique, it's so finesse. You fail that, then you have to go back to fundamentals in game 3 after kind of being a little bit embarrassed that your draft kind of fell on its face and you trusted CV Max with it, but then as you played it, you were like, we didn't really scrim this that much and we don't really know what we're doing. And then you go into game 3, your mentality's got to be so much worse than when it was when you started the series. We're like, nothing to lose. It's T1. Like, if we win this, it'll be so hype. If we lose, no one will be surprised. You win game 1, and then you just kind of toss all that like mental gain from winning game 1 and that confidence you had away by playing weird picks and then having to go into game 3, where T1 actually has this insane mental edge over you at that moment as well. T1 in that series, and I feel like in this season, has literally done the same throw every single
I
game.
was gonna say, like, that's what the most disturbing thing about T1 is, like, this should have been a 2-0. They should have won game 1, but they just end up like inting out leads and throwing games.
Every time it's like around the blue buff on red side, they push deep for picks. and this must be working well in scrims. It's a very T1 moment where you're pushing aside, little skirmish happens there, then people rotate in or they teleport in. Faker gets there very quickly, and then boom, you win this skirmish like 5v4 or 5v3, where the enemy team's reaction time is a little bit slower, the rotation's not as fast. And T1 does do this all the time. But this season, it feels like every time they have like a 4,000, 5,000 gold lead off of like 1 or 2 kills, some really good macro plays, some turret
Yeah,
plays,
lots of pushing, like taking
push.
advantage of priority. Like T1 really did in game one have a very significant advantage that they threw. And you know what? Well, they almost threw game two as well.
Yeah. That top side fight where they fought into the
They
Talia.
they they disrespected the fact that Talia had TP and like they didn't know where Cuz was, so they forced a fight in the top side and got destroyed.
So these moments that T1, we used to really, celebrate T1 for these types of forced skirmishes where Faker pushes a little bit too far. It seems like, oh, he's definitely gonna die. They're gonna collapse on him, but then everyone shows up super fast and they bait another team into Faker's calculated retreat, and then they win these fights. But now it's like T1 is trying to do this in a more extreme way in the enemy jungle and just getting absolutely punished for it. I feel like teams have just realized like, oh, T1 goes in no matter what. They can't help it, bro.
I
They're
mean,
gonna
Faker
go in.
also just owner was like walking into enemy blue side, like you say, had no ultimate on Sejuani, and Faker TP is into the middle of the Guangdong Freaks and then immediately dies, and then they throw their advantage. Like it's sad. Like T1 should have won game one. They played very badly around Narbar. Like they were split pushing, and then like the Mega Nar was fading like as Guangdong was rushing Baron. Like the whole setups were like very weird for T1 throughout this series. And it's concerning. I will say. Like, sure, they won the games against D plus and they looked a little bit cleaner in those games, but also D plus gave them Ash, which I what?
Yeah, I don't know.
They gave them Ash 2 games. It's like there's one champion you do not give T1, and that is Ash.
Yeah.
Really, D plus? Really?
They have the
You
2
give him
best Ashe
Ash?
players in the tournament. And then the team that plays around Ashe the best.
Yeah.
So, I think T1, like, my hope for T1 is that their early game and the fundamentals around that are still as solid as ever, and are really only rivaled by Gen.G. Like, their early game control, how they which objectives they fight over, how they swap lanes occasionally, the advantages they get just from lane and good macro plays, very slight advantages, but they always add up to, like, a ton of gold. It starts with, like, oh, it's a 500 gold lead, it's 800 gold lead, 1,200, then they get one pick, and then it's like, okay, 2,400. Like, we killed one player, what can we pull out of the map? How many jungle camps can we steal? How many plates can we get? Can we get the whole turret, etc.? And then they'll force the enemy team because their macro is so good into some awkward position where they need to try desperately to force that fight against T1, and they usually lose it in the early game, right? Or they just can't do it because T1 just has a numbers advantage. Their macro is too good, the rotation's too clean. But then we get to like 20 minutes in, 18 to 25 minutes in, and then T1 just sends it and get wiped and then lose all that map control. And then T1 seems incredibly bad at playing from behind in the late game, like where they're actually with no map control, no prio, no vision. They don't know how to make proactive plays when they're not in control. Is what it seems like to me. And obviously, every team is going to struggle with that, right? Like you can't see, you don't have vision, like But other teams have been really good at finding angles, like Gen.G even from behind, which is rare. Will sometimes be able to set up a really strong split push with Chovy and then get some vision around him, cover him, and then force the enemy team into an awkward fight away from an objective. T1 doesn't seem good at doing that right now from behind. And I think that needs to change. And T1's playstyle hasn't really changed, which is fine for this meta because if Faker can get push in mid and then they could roam, then they'll just dive bottom side and make the same plays they always do. But I do want to see T1 just be okay with playing a longer game and not trying to hard force a fight, hard force the advantage. Just be okay with being 5,000 gold up and winning the game. You don't need to like dumpster them one more time and like all in this crazy fight because you're ahead and then win with 9,000 gold at like 24 minutes. You don't need to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Just win slowly. Just cross your T's, dot your I's, play it slow. Please. I'm asking you
Yeah.
to.
Play properly around your ult cooldowns and your teleport cooldowns. Like that's really been the problem, right? and like don't disrespect your opponents. I mean, it gets dangerous. Like T1, this was a great composition for T1 in game number 2 versus Guangdong Freaks. Like they love the pick compositions. They love the Viego reset comps. It's great for them to have Callista and Nico. This plays right into their wheelhouse. They're winning bot. You know, they've got the Ari. Owner has 3 kills on a reset Viego comp at like 8 minutes into the game or whatever. And then they just send it topside and lose all their advantages. Like, why? Like, why are we trying to make plays when we have no idea where their jungler is and they have more teleports that they can use than us? Like, somebody should be making that call. Somebody should be like, hey, guys, jungle MIA. They have 2 TPs and they could use them both right now. Like, come on, T1. You know better than this. You're a better team than this.
Yeah.
But there's the silver lining, Wolf, is that they won a game with Zeri.
Yeah, I mean, I think Guma. I don't have the numbers up in front of me right now, but I think he has a really good win rate on Zeri. He just doesn't have that many games on it. And we've
Well,
talked
they
about
play badly with it. That's the problem. Is like the eye test doesn't hold up when Guma plays Zeri, and it's not necessarily even Guma's fault. It's that they're bad as a team at playing around the Zeri.
yeah, they don't like to play a slower, more measured front
He
to
has a
back team fight.
60% Zeri win rate, which is actually his career win rate is 67%, so it's actually below his career. And out of his top champions, it's his worst one, basically. Kai'Sa is technically a lower win rate, but he's also played. Oh, he's played the same number of games, I guess. No, he's played slightly 2 fewer games on Kai'Sa. But I mean, he hasn't been the Kai'Sa Zeri guy.
Yeah, he really hasn't, which is unfortunate considering that this meta is really quite significantly strong for those 2 picks. I mean, you could still play Callista, you could still play a lot of other stuff. You could still play Ashe if it's open, which it won't be very often. But I think I've seen some high points on Guma Zeri, like in the grand finals, for example, against Gen.G. Like he's pulled it out and had some really good games on it. So while I do agree that T1 clearly know it's not his favorite and they don't like playing around it because they very rarely pick it, I do think that if he's forced to, he can. Same with his Ezreal. Like he's pretty good at the Ezreal. We don't see it all too often, but he can absolutely play it. The big silver lining for me is just that T1's early game has still been incredible. It's still been so strong.
Yes.
And all they
True.
have to do is just not try to get too fancy or not try to get too greedy. And I think that this team could just patiently win games that they may have otherwise lost. Like even in their Nongshim series, they did the same thing where they like over pushed in the same part of the red side and just went straight face first into Nongshim and almost lost that game. So and D plus series, same thing. Like there's just no need to int T1. Okay. Maybe it's a protest because of all the stuff that's going on with the DDoS. I don't know, but there's no need. There's no
Well, it's
need.
also weird because, it's not like it looks like their early game or individual mechanics are suffering terribly, which is what you would expect if they couldn't play solo queue. It's actually their teamwork that is falling apart, which should be the stuff they can scrim with. So that's a little bit weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the weirdest part. It's also Faker, who's been known for, and we've really again championed him for his incredible shot calling and his reads on the map and how he's been able to oftentimes say, the Huni quote like, "Okay, I'm gonna die top lane in 2 minutes, and then you guys are gonna get 3 turrets," stuff like that. But I don't know, he hasn't had the same, or at least I haven't felt the same sort of like wisdom out from him in some of the calls we're seeing, and at least his laning phase seems to have been, significantly improved from MSI, where it looked really rough. And he also, had, maybe it's because he claims he had wrist injuries, like, flaring back up. But
Oh,
then
really?
he went to, and that was after MSI, where he said that in an interview, or maybe on his stream or something. I saw somebody post that he kind of confirmed, like, yeah, I was flaring up a little bit, but not as bad as before. But then he did all the Hall of Legends media stuff, because he got the Ari skin and there was all the press stuff, like tons and tons of interviews and stuff he had to do for that. And his team was unable to properly play solo queue. So, maybe that was like the forced break for his wrists that he needed. And so now his laning phase is back to normal. I hope that he doesn't have any more issues with his wrists, but um, I think it's a good sign that so far he's looked very good in lane. Minus, yes, he did make that mistake versus Showmaker, I think it was, where he just died.
We
Corki,
just ran at him.
yeah, that did happen. That was kind of strange. That's very rare. But beyond that, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. His laning phase has been pretty good.
Yeah. So Kwangdong, I just need to see more from them, like before I get super hyped. T1, obviously struggling with some of the mid game shot calling, still able to come out on top, but I also blame D plus Kia for that, who thought it was like a super good idea to draft Nidalee first pick on blue side 2 games in a row for no reason. And then set up horrible compositions around it, including that second composition. I mean, the drafting was just complete trash for D plus in that series. Sometimes you have days like that, right? They bounce back later in this week. Gen.G still looks incredibly strong. I mean, they look like they can just do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah, DRX looked a little, like I'll be honest, DRX got me. I don't want to say hyped, but I was like, oh, maybe they could get 6th place. Like maybe this team is actually kind of relevant, and they get stomped in the first round or second round of playoffs if we're looking at like the most ideal scenario. But likely like they'll fight for playoffs and they'll make the end of regular season interesting. Because sometimes the end of regular season, you're like, all right, we know our playoff teams are. Let me watch the bottom 4 like play weird games that don't matter, and it's a little bit unfun. But DRX started to look like the kind of team where I'm like, oh, there'll be some interesting storylines here later. Teddy looking pretty good. Yehu definitely a big improvement over Satab. He's the mainstay. Frog over Rascal starting to look better incrementally. Rascal out. Sad to say it.
Pleta is like a legit player too. So
Yeah, Pleta's super legit. So Sponge, one day we'll get there, but he's not there yet. But DRX looked kind of like a team that, despite like all of its problems, could be interesting. Kind of like Bro was interesting sometimes in the past, where you're like, oh, there was a good Bro game. It was actually super legit. Like they're a bad team, but like they had like the 1 or 2 really good ones. Maybe they could make playoffs. So I thought that's where we were going until I watched this DRX Nongshim series. That did occur on my birthday, and it was not the present I was looking for. And that series was so rough and so disjointed, and everybody looked like completely clueless. And Teddy had a horrible series. And then I was like, well, I'm not interested in this team anymore. And so we don't have to talk about it today, actually, either, because we talked about them a little bit last week, and now I'm not interested in them anymore. Like they can earn their right to be back on the show, but it's not it. It's not it for me. Also, a lot of people are like, why don't you guys talk about BNK FearX? Why don't you guys talk about Sandbox?
no.
No.
I'll talk FearX. I will talk about you when you fucking put Willer back in the lineup, you bastards.
Willer's not looking good in challenges, though. I don't know what's going on with him. I heard a rumor that he was kind of like he was sick for a while, so he couldn't scrim very well during the last part of the off season. So they were like, all right, well, we'll just run with Raptor because this is just a rumor I heard. We'll just run with Raptor because he was standing in for scrims and he looked pretty okay with us, so we'll go with him for a little bit. But then I watched Willer in challengers and he looked really out of sorts. So I don't. Maybe I don't know, because Wheeler was the best part of this roster to me, and very obviously brought a lot of energy to the team, and shot calling was good, and like he was a very positive player, even in losses. So he was really important to the team. But if he's just not good right now, then I guess he's just not good right now. But I want the good Wheeler back at least. Like I can agree with you on that one.
So you would say you're good Willer hunting?
Yes. I like that. That's a good. That was quick. That one came out of nowhere.
You
That
can
one
use it
really
on
did.
the broadcast.
Okay, I'll steal that one. I'll give you credit after everyone's like, "Damn, that was good, Wolf." I'm like, "Well, that was actually Monty." Um, but execute execute is a player for me where I do respect what he's accomplished so far in terms of his challengers. Like he went to LEC, right, and made some splash over there, but he hasn't developed as a player, like, at all. Like, I feel like he just is still like, coin flip, I'm going in. Don't care if my team's ready. I'm not even communicating with them. I'm just going in. Um, And that was kind of cute at first because Sainz made some really hype, cool, clutch plays where you're like, damn, that was a 1 in a million chance, and he made it work. But the other like 999,999 other chances, like the other possibilities keep propping up when like the coin lands on tails, and we're like, where are you going? Like, what was the thought? And sometimes even in lane, in matchups where you shouldn't go in, he's like walking up into Alistair range and getting engaged and losing his health bar, losing his lane for Henna, Henna's like looking at him like, I'm just trying to kill minions. Can you stop going in? I'm back. He's like, dude, I'm backing. Don't go
But,
in.
but what if he gave aiming 17 kills in a 28-minute game?
Well, I mean, then D plus would win, and that would be the end of it. Um, but I legit think Execute. He initially looked to me like kind of like Bible. You remember Bible for D plus? Where I'm like, oh, he's
Yep.
good engaged support. Like he's a little rough around the edges, but I'm sure he'll develop. Bible ends up just getting pushed away. He's a coach now. But Execute, he stayed, and he's still going in. He's still not playing a measured play style. He's still not playing any enchanter supports at all. He's still just he sees his Zenith Blade angle. He sees the enemy champion in range of his engage ability, and he's like, I'm going in. Um, and closer is still budget Zeka, and I don't know Monty. It's just
Yeah. Here's my question for you. When is closer supposed to be good? Like, when is this guy supposed to reach the next level of his play? He sat for years behind Faker on the bench on T1, and he has never evolved at any point in time. Even when Live Sandbox was doing well, was it closer who was doing well? No, right? When is this guy supposed to like take the next step and become a truly good LCK mid laner? Because
I
I'm
mean
done watching this guy. I am fucking done with this guy.
2021 T1 was like when he had his big chance. I felt like, and they were trusting him a lot. And that roster was the Daney like 10-man roster where they were swapping
Yep.
everybody in and out. Like that was his chance to really shine, I feel. And he had some decent games there. Like he played Zoe, he played Aurelia mid, I remember back then. And then he had some really rough games. And then they were like, okay, Danny's fired, and that good try, but it's Faker now again. It's Faker. He's Faker. Sorry, your closer. And at the time, we didn't know what your closer means. Like we were like, oh, your closer. He's Faker. But now we know what your closer means. Like he is not on the same tier. He is. His champion pool looked like every time he played back then in 2021, you were like, oh, he plays the melee champions. He likes to do that. He likes AD champions. He likes melee champions. He likes Zoe. He prefers assassins if possible. And then when he went as the mainstay mid laner to Sandbox, he still just played only the same like assassin champions well, and they're the ones he really struggled on. Like couldn't play control mages very well. Like his Orianna was okay, but he's just always been that guy, and he's been basically since he was a trainee on T1. It's been 4 years, about give or take, and like Karis, he just really hasn't lived up to the hype, hasn't improved. And you could give it on one hand, like he played with a bunch of weak junglers. So, obviously you're going to look a little bit worse as a result because you just don't have anybody covering you, or they're not covering you as consistently well, or not playing through you. And then his top laners have been like Birdall and Clear recently, which is also, hasn't been inspiring. So I'll give him some credit in that the team around him hasn't been good, but he just hasn't made big flashy plays like almost every other mid laner in the LCK has on standard champions like Azir. Like when was the big closer Emperor's Divide? Have we ever seen one? You know what I mean? There's never. I feel like I've never watched closer do anything inspiring except like cleaning up kills on Akali. Where you're like, there he goes. He's on Akali. He got 4 kills in this team fight. That was
Yeah.
pretty rad,
Look,
but it wasn't him.
my issue with him is that like even when he arguably did his best, which was on that 2022 Live Sandbox roster that took third place, right? And this was the Prince roster. It wasn't even closer we were fucking talking about. Like they went 13-5 in the regular season. You know what I mean? Like, that was very impressive. They were very convincingly third place, but it was Prince that was popping off, right? It wasn't Closer. And then at the end, they just completely fall on their face. Like, they beat DRX in summer playoffs, and then they lose to DRX, and DRX wins Worlds. Like, what the fuck is that, Live Sandbox? You could have prevented us from the horrible fate of DRX winning Worlds.
And
Um,
then they also gave Prince to America, and then he fell off, and he didn't
yeah.
actually lost Prince as well. Summit, we lost him as well, but you can keep him. Unfortunately, I don't want him back. But
Well, it was Dove at that time. I mean, that
Love it,
roster in
love it,
2022 was Dove, Croco, Closer, Prince, and Kyle. And those of you who know, who've been watching LPL, like anyone's legend with Kyle's actually playing very well right now. And Croco's also on that roster. And Croco's been okay. He's been better than he was in Live Sandbox during this era. Like, if anything, Croco was the like volatile player on that iteration of Live Sandbox. But Closer is just thoroughly, he's the most mid. You know what I mean? Like, why is this guy, like, what is his upside? You know what I mean, Wolf? At what point do we just literally try anyone else within this roster? Because what the fuck is the point of continuing to have Closer?
yeah, I mean, I feel like I could say the same thing about Karis.
Yes,
And
sure. Let's do it. He's terrible too.
and then also like some of the other mid players like on Nongshim, like the challengers ones, Fiesta's gone. Calix and Call Me, who were really hyped up. They're obviously they haven't played as long, so they still have a chance. They have a chance to change our views because it's still early days for them. But ultimately for Closer and for Karis, they've been in the league for about the same time. The same time period, and both of them were really hyped up. T1 trainee, Gen.G trainee, and they didn't live up to it. They went to budget teams, and like now they're budget players, and so why don't we try somebody else? But
Exactly. Why don't we at least try somebody who might have some level of upside instead of just like like continuing to like necro Closer's fucking career?
yeah, well the topic we talked about last week with the challengers system, they don't really have anybody right now. Either of these teams. I'm not going to confirm what their mid laners are. Satab is the mid laner behind Yehu, right? We already talked about him.
Yep.
Him being a little bit, not so great these days. Looking into why Live Sandbox's roster is not showing up for me. Give me a second. But into Live Sandbox for a second, what their mid laners, I can't even remember. Daystar. He
That's
is,
FearX's
yeah,
mid laner is
Fear
Daystar, and the guy behind there was some excitement behind Pool Bay at the very least, who is the challengers. Ivory and Pool Bay are the mid laners
yeah,
on Breon challengers.
so Daystar, I wanted to look up Daystar because I couldn't remember his name. He's very new, like he just joined, so there's not a ton of data on him, but clearly probably not ready at this point in time. So what other mid laners are out there right now, free agent, that could be picked up? Like there's not a whole lot of options. Poolbay was a little bit hyped because he looked pretty good in challengers like a year and a half ago. And then a little bit last year, but actually last year a little bit shaky. But we were just excited about Poolbay because his name was not Karis, so that was the most exciting part about him. And I'm not even here to like shit on Karis. I feel bad because there have been some games of Karis over the last few years I've been just outright inspired by, like some of his Twisted Fate play when he's on Galio, like his global mid champs were really good. Not Talia not so much, but other picks like the TF, he's done a really great job on. He had a few good Silas games. His Azir was much better than it is now. It's like he's lost focus, or he's tired of being on bad teams. He was like really excited when he was on Gen.G and he was playing better there. He had a better roster, better coaching staff. Now he's on Bro and he just feels hopeless. Maybe he's not trying as hard. I don't know. I've talked to Papa Smithy about Karis as well. Papa Smithy was like, yeah, Karis was one of our, big prospects. Like this guy looked really good. We're still like thinking he's got a lot of potential. I'm like, everybody's been saying he's got a lot of potential. I'm still just not seeing it. But yeah, I mean, he is probably better than Poolbay is right now. But the fact that there's only like Pulbay is the only person we could say like, oh, is who else could they get? Is again back to the conversation we had last week on this show. Very concerning about where is the talent pipeline. If it's not there, then we have Karis for like 1, 2, 3 more years. I don't want that. I don't want any more Karis.
I think you just kick some of these teams out of the LCK, man. We got to get this down to like 8 teams. This can't be allowed to keep happening, Wolf.
It might be. I mean, that might be what happens next year. We don't know what the format for LCK is going to be. So, some teams might leave. I know some teams were interested in selling at least to another org in the past, not like selling out of the LCK, but selling to other orgs because they were having financial problems. I think a lot of that's been sorted out since late 2022 and some parts of 2023, where certain orgs were like really struggling to figure out how they were going to make ends meet. But it is possible, right, that we go to the relegation system with 2 guest teams, and maybe they just tell all the teams like, hey, if you want, you can keep your challengers team. You don't have to. And then we have a new system where teams like Spear Gaming and Shadow Corporation's orgs come through and like actually play in challengers, and then they could promote in. And that could be what the future looks like. And if that means we get full rosters of teams and not just pieces of teams coming up on budget rosters only, like if it means I can see more than Call Me coming in to go like 0-4 against a bottom table mid laner, and I could see the full KT roster promote in, then that's what I want. Give me that. Don't give me this. don't give me Pulbay signed to not play a single game. Not play a single game. He hasn't played a single game. Not one.
Dude,
Why is he on the team?
The GMing in LCK is just absolutely wild, in my opinion. Like, I don't understand why you do this at all. And it's like, do we just really have to keep slogging through? Like, you're 0-4, bro. You aren't going to playoffs. This is the end for you. Like, fucking try out some other players. Right?
And like the drafting for Bro hasn't even been that bad. I just couldn't do it. I don't know if you heard my like metaphor where I was like, look, if you have Nidalee, it's like if you give someone a chisel, they can't make a sculpture. But if you give Bro a compass, they should be able to draw a fucking perfect circle, right? They couldn't even do it, man. They couldn't draw a perfect circle. Couldn't do it. Oh,
Tragic.
I want to see better things. And like in the old LCK format, you would have at least one team come up and you're like, oh, interesting. And then Griffin obviously popped off, and there have been other examples of teams that promoted and that did pretty well. But if they are bad, then they're gone, actually. It's like, oh, they weren't good. I guess we have them forever now. No, they're gone. I think that maybe the LCK, and we've talked about this on the show before, but maybe this region wasn't ready for franchising. And with the expensive player salaries that we have in this region and the extremely top heavy,
I mean, to be fair, the Korean fans never wanted franchising when it was introduced. Like, it wasn't like the LCK fans were like, "Oh yeah," they actually were very pro, promotion relegation. I mean, nobody wanted the league system. That's not something that has happened in Korean esports before, really. It's not like, oh yeah, we're used to leagues. It's like, no, we're used to tournaments in Korean esports. So they didn't like that. And Riot has basically just inflicted all of the Western bullshit onto the Korean scene.
And the way that the LCK left OGN and moved to LOL Park, and they built the arena, right, and that whole like advancement forward, that type of new production we had, like OGN was run by CJ, a huge company, right? So they had a ton of funding, and they could do big grandiose finals and stuff like that based on that funding and sponsors they got, and some help from Riot, obviously, not always, but depending on the year and the timeline, sometimes some big help from Riot. But I think in order to do something as grandiose as OGN, like franchising was quite appealing to get some injection of money to actually then be able to run this tournament and then hopefully give it back to orgs who weren't getting as much out of the league. And we had a lot of orgs like Rocks in LCK history that just had no money, and the players weren't able to live sustainable lives. And it was like you either win the tournament and get famous and go to a team that has money, or you just wither and you disappear. And there was not a lot of sustainability for players. So I understand from a perspective of all the problems of what was wrong with not having franchising, why franchising was good. I think now the esports and viewership has gone up significantly. We're a little
Yep.
bit more. I know it sounds weird to say this during the esports winter, but compared to the OGN days, a lot more stable in terms of LCK orgs. You know, you have big orgs like DRX
Sure.
that before
That's just true.
like Kingzone Dragon X and you know becoming DRX before and Longzhu, like they had problems. They weren't even paying their players and stuff like that. Like people don't remember this, but like this org has become a lot more stable. It's become like a legit actual business now with multiple esports across multiple games or multiple teams across multiple esports. And so franchising made it seem like we were leaning towards this is going to make sense, but ultimately I think a lot of the teams at the bottom decide, oh man, it's really expensive actually. If you want to compete with the best teams, you have to spend a lot of money. Player salaries are really expensive, and it's tough for certain teams to really be able to maintain that. And so they just do minimum salary, pick up the challengers players, and sit at the bottom of the standings. I can't imagine teams are happy with that. So maybe if they're given the option to like drop out with no consequence to allow the new guest system or relegation system. I don't know. I guess Riot doesn't want to call it that, but you know what it is.
Guest teams.
Maybe that actually does happen. I wouldn't mind it because at this stage, if the teams that have the most fans, the teams that have huge legacies, like they're not going to get kicked out of the LCK. T1's not going to get relegated. Okay, even DRX, which maybe would be on the threat of relegation, the entire org isn't going to crumble and collapse because they fall out for a split. They could get their act together, get some money together, build a better roster, and then come back, for example. It's the orgs that don't want to spend money that will get relegated, and they aren't spending money, and they aren't offering interesting games to us right now. They aren't trying, frankly, it seems like. So I didn't expect to go on a rant about this, but here we are.
No, I mean, I think it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely an interesting topic of conversation, right? Because um yeah, look, it's a lot of this hasn't been sustainable, and there were a lot of teams. Like, I'm not going to pretend that in OGN it was, there was a lot of sustainability, or that teams weren't taking advantage of players, because a lot of them were. But it was also it was the very beginning of the esports scene in Korea when things were a lot less stable. And even I think if you went back to the OGN system now, Wolf, you would not see that to that degree any longer, just because there's a lot more money, there's a lot more viewership, right? There's a lot more professionalism around League of Legends esports these days.
The
But
infrastructure is there, you know. I mean, people have big
yeah,
team
yeah, yeah.
houses and stuff, and they've got investors, and it's different.
So I struggle though. I struggle with thinking that the current state of things is super good for a lot of these bottom teams, and they, like you say, they just feel like they're not trying, and cutting down this league or finding a way to re-encourage promotion relegation and bringing in more exciting formats, I think would be very good. And it's also just a logical fallacy to say, well, because viewership is better now, this, everything must be right. It's possible that by switching formats we would get even better viewership, right? That's what I would argue. If we had more finals for people to get excited about, viewership would probably be even better than it is right now.
Yeah. The one thing that I want to make sure though, if we have, three splits next year, which is like all but 100% confirmed in Korea because they said all major regions will, um, is that the tournaments, if the format is not uniform across all three, that the titles actually get counted separately. Because if there's, like, say the first split is actually just um, it's only 8 teams. They're like, sorry, you have to be top 8 from summer to play in the winter season. So bottom 2 don't go in, or they cut them out, like we were talking about. Maybe, who knows? And then it's just 2 GSL groups into a playoff bracket, which is like, you know, double elimination, which is basically its own GSL group. And then that's it, and it's like a very short 3-week tournament. And then they're like, that's an LCK title. I'm like, I don't think so. Like compared to how the LCK
Well,
has been run.
I hate to tell you, but I mean, there were the 3 splits previously, right, with OGN. So is that invalidating it? So, well,
Well,
if you're so interested in title equality, I beg you to join me on my Gen.G does not get Samsung's titles train, and my Breon does not get Najin's titles train. There's room. Would you like to board?
look, I'm not I like I've never really been against you on this. I'm just saying like how Riot has decided by these orgs have
Riot
decided how
doesn't
they
get to
work.
decide that.
Well, I mean, you could protest it, but it's on their banners. You know what I mean? So like Riot, LCK, and the teams have decided. But you'll notice on the banners because you
Wow,
talked
the
about
teams decided they wanted more titles. Weird. I'm so shocked by that
oh they
decision.
all acquired other orgs. They acquired
Can't
other
buy.
orgs.
You can't buy titles, Wolf. There's literally nothing about Samsung that relates to Gen.G. They didn't. There's nobody on the same ownership. Uh, there's no through line of players or coaches or staff.
Except everyone except you universally agrees that, that it is the case.
Look, I
I'm
can't
just
I
saying.
can't fix other people's stupidity, man. I wish
I'm
I
just
could.
saying. So what? But I have a real point though about this format thing on the LCK banners. When you look at the all the titles that they have, like T1 has like a million. The icon that they use for the LCK titles is reflective of the league that it was. So for the champions tournament, it's actually
Mm,
all the champions. Then it's the LCK old, reversed, basically image flipped logo that Riot took when they took the format in 2015. And then anything that's prior or post franchising is sorry, there's the first champions logo, then the second champions logo, the eagle, and then there's the current like butterfly two triangles logo, right? So Riot does at least contextualize like the time period of which
that's
these
good.
titles are taken, and if you know what the tournament was like back then you know that. But if they all have the butterfly um, icon that we have now for LCK, then that's a little bit, to me, that's a little bit concerning because I think it adds a lot of confusion if the titles are not the same. So that's one. We could change the format up a little bit, but I don't want it to be like you have to have been there. Like split one has this format, split two has this completely different format, split three has this completely different format. Because then you're like not sure which titles were won at which time. You're like, was 2023 the year where we did Fearless, or 2024 the year we did Fearless draft in the second round robin, and but then when we later we did, you have to remember this kind of stuff to contextualize what happened in that year. And I don't know, I'm not a big fan of it, Monty.
I understand. I mean, I think that's good that they would maybe consider contextualizing it. But you know what, Wolf? If I have to bite the bullet here, and if I have to make the choice of should all titles be considered equal or should I just have more garbage league formats, I'm gonna choose all titles are equal, and we'll just contextualize it ourselves, right? It's just not worth it to me to continue down this path of having a vastly inferior format because we're worried about title inflation.
I mean, title inflation can be like the funniest thing is we have this insanely dominant team right now who just got the first back to back the four-peat. Um, and the next split or next season, if we have three splits that are all really short, and Gen.G stacks three more after winning the fifth in a row in summer here in 2024, and then goes to like 8 titles in a row. And then we move to like 4 seasons in 2026, and then it's like keep stacking them up. That's where it gets a little bit weird, right? But again, something has to change. I think we both agree something has to change because what we have right now is 5 good teams, 2 to 3, depending on the season, okay teams that like maybe there'll be something, but usually don't end up being it. And then 2 to 3 teams that are like
I mean,
I
I
don't
just
know. I
I
don't know
can't.
if these teams would get top 4 in challengers. Like that's where we're
Yeah,
at.
yeah, exactly. And like I can't deal with any more double round robin watching the bad teams just like fucking have a rumble in the dumpster 6 times a week. You know what I mean? Like, no. I'm over it. I'm over it, Wolf. Meaningful games between good teams. Motivation to improve because these teams take no risks. They just sit there, as we've been discussing, with their absolute low ceiling mid tier players doing fucking nothing week in and week out. It's absurd. This is absurd.
Yeah, it's just we deserve better, and it's time to like get these teams to try and give them an opportunity to try, and then if they say no, then maybe we get some teams that will. That's what I hope for.
Yeah, and I
That's all I
do
can
I
dream
do
for.
believe that there are going to be motivated groups of young players who will push each other to improve and that could be promoted, but there's just no motivation right now because what possible motivation do you have to like do it on your own or like strike out and try and make the next Griffin? You don't have any.
Like if you're a new investor, like say you're I don't know, let's say Lotte, the company wants to make a League of Legends team. They would have to buy a spot from like Bro. And these teams put a ton of money into these spots. They're not going to sell them for cheap. So you have the cost of buying one of these slots, which I don't think is controlled by Riot. It would be completely up to the team that's selling their spot, is extremely expensive. Some of these teams trying to make a profit, these bottom teams when they want to sell, because obviously who wouldn't? But and the slot is still valuable. But then you're like, okay, well maybe we'll start small. Maybe we won't start in the LCK. Is Lotte going to make an Academy Series team and then try to sell those players to like Shadow Corp and then send them up? Because that's all you can do. You can't make a challengers team. That's not allowed because only LCK franchise teams can be in the new ecosystem. So you can't even have Griffin. The Academy teams, and by the way, when I say Academy, that's tier 3 in Korea. There's challengers and then there's Academy below that. The Academy series is wild and crazy. They change the format from time to time. The players aren't even required to have their IDs in English. So like if you watch it, you'll see their names are written in Hangul in Korean. Um, and that's where you can invest as an org, but you can never get into the LCK now unless you want to spend millions of dollars to buy the roster and then all the costs that come with managing an
Right.
LCK roster as well. So there can't be another Griffin right now. It's not allowed. You don't promote out of academy. And there are a lot of the LCK teams also have an academy team, like a third tier team that then they feed into their challengers team with, and then the challengers team feeds into LEC, um, into LCK, but sometimes. Um, and the teams, the orgs that are in academy series right now are just existing to make money by finding prospects and then selling them to challengers teams or other regions. So like there is no like romanticism anymore about how to like push these new cool teams that no one's heard of to like the synergy is there. Like we saw them go extremely dominant run in challenges. What will they do in the LCK? It's like, well, what will Thanatos do in LEC and Is that is that where we're at? You know, we'll never see this full roster in LCK. No, we won't. We got to see KT's full roster when they weren't even the best team in LCK that one time. We got to see Nongshim's whole roster get promoted because they ran out of money, but they couldn't accomplish anything. Like I don't know.
The coffers of the noodle team ran dry. All right. Well, I think that's enough for us today. Next week, Wolf, we do have some exciting games. We have Hanwha versus Gen.G. We have KT versus Brion, the battle for last place in the LCK. Wolf, all I have to say is on Thursday, someone's going 05.
Yeah,
It's gonna be somebody.
it's probably gonna be Bro, but I'm
Yep.
not 100% confident that it's gonna be Bro right now. I'm only like 70% confident that Bro's gonna lose.
I think what probably one of the more interesting matches is going to be Kwangdong versus D plus because that could be like very legitimately the fourth place battle for the split. And whoever wins that one is going to have, you know, the tiebreaker advantage, at least in the first round robin. So that game is actually incredibly important.
Yeah. In terms of
And we have a telecom war, Wolf. On Saturday, we have a telecom war,
yeah, I'm gonna
which will
pretend.
not be fun.
No, it's also going to be it's the special T1 show match, or it's not show match, but special T1 like off-site match. Like they're doing it
Are
at a
you going there to broadcast
no.
that, or are you doing
So
it from Lowell Park?
so the reason there's two reasons why we're not going there. One is because it's logistically like quite it would be quite incredibly hard to set up a English casting desk there for such a short amount
Sure.
of time with the budget that they have for just this show match.
Yep.
But the main reason is that is just one regular season game that day, and then the next game is being played in Lol Park. Like Nongshim Hanwha Life is not being played there, as far as I know.
Fair enough.
So, I'll need to be in Lol Park for that. Also, I don't think the Korean casters. I'm not 100% sure about this. I don't even think the Korean casters are going to this. I think T1 is having some sort of setup where they have like their ex players casting or something like that on site. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think they're having like either it's going to be the LCK casters are casting from Lol Park, like Cloud Templar and Sunkay or whatever, going to be casting from Lol Park, and then on site only for the audience that's there, it'll be like Wolf and Bang casting or something like that. I think is what they're doing. But anyway, I don't think it's going to be a very exciting series based on what KT's current form is. The last few Telecom Wars have been pretty hype. This one, it feels like we're going back to 2021, where you're like, yeah, probably not a good KT roster, unfortunately. I was going to mention
right.
FearX, just real quick, last one. FearX,
Oh God, no.
big week for them though. Like if they can win against Kwangdong, that would be a pretty big upset. They have Bro. You got to bounce back. You go 0-2 this week, FearX, and we're really never going to be talking about you on this show.
All right. Well, there you guys go. We'll be back next week, same time for the Monte and Wolf Show for all things LCK. We'll see you then.